IVM.
I wanted to make payments very friction-free, right? Where for $10, I was like, can I get someone to read, right? And which is where I think Vijay Shekhar was amazing, where at that point he had only given Uber the deep integration, right, into the Paytm wallet. And we were the second startup to get it. And I still have no idea why Vijay did it. I went, met him, 2-3 hours, we chatted. He pushed me. And he said, fine, Durga, you should do it, right? And he just let us integrate that Paytm wallet, right? Which, boom, helped us solve for payments.
Hello and welcome to the Filter Coffee podcast. My guest today started her career in news journalism, and over the past dozen years or so, Durga Raghunath has helped businesses achieve scale on digital, right? Especially through the mobile experience. She loves to be in the confluence of content, community, and commerce. She's been the CEO of the digital business at News 18, launched Firstpost many years back. And then she co-founded Juggernaut Books, which is something that we will talk about in much detail. She's been the CEO for digital for Indian Express and is now the Senior Vice President for Growth at Zomato. Welcome to the Filter Coffee podcast, Durga. How are you doing?
I'm good, Karthik. Pleasure to do this.
So how's the lockdown been treating you? It's been 100 days. Any highlights?
Any highlights? Well, I've learned a lot about Star Wars from my 5-year-old son. So I can tell you about the different kinds of sabers. So somehow that passed by me when I was a kid.
Right.
But now I've got my second chance at mastering Star Wars. And I'm fully into it.
Excellent.
So that's sort of been my full highlight. Yeah, has been really spending time with my 5-year-old and totally enjoying that. But other than that, kind of also reconnecting to, with family who I guess I haven't spoken to in a long time. Now, of course, that's starting to get, I think, as most of us are, it's starting to get a little sort of exhausting. But yeah, I mean, all the sort of crests and troughs of the 100 days, right?
Yeah, no, I can imagine it is getting exhausting. But I did, before it got exhausting, I did go through this phase where I was suddenly in touch with everybody I always wanted to be in touch with. Right?
Right.
I really enjoyed that for about 30, 40 days. But I think I'm now back to being my original self. Hey, like I mentioned in the introduction, right? You had a very unique journey in the corporate world until now. I think the best way to sort of describe it is to take a line out of your LinkedIn profile itself, right? Where you've always been at the confluence of content, community, and commerce. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about being that sort of a leader. I know we spoke recently some time back, and I was just telling you, you're the only person I know who's been an editorial leader and as well as a digital growth leader. Right?
I think I kind of just wandered, right, from really loving book publishing to begin with. And funnily enough, it was in book publishing when in New York, I think this was very, very, I'm going to date myself immediately, but I think 2005, right, where Jane Friedman was the CEO, then did this large digitization of backlist project. And I didn't even know what it was. And I kind of volunteered for it because nobody else was wanting to do it. And I think I kind of fell in love with what the internet could do with content at that point in time, where we just digitized this entire backlist. And I think the possibility of search and metadata and just organizing and giving structure to content in the universe of search and the universe of discovery, I think that kind of, that penny dropped, Karthik. And I think my kind of like this long love affair with digital content sort of began there. And then when I came back to India, we were still in very early stages, right? And then you're thinking about, okay, I've discovered this amazing thing of what the internet can do with information and how much more knowledgeable and sort of, if you're curious, like how amazing it can be. And how do we get more users to sort of figure that out, right? And I think that is the journey that led to sort of trying to build products in news, trying to build products in publishing, and now trying to figure out search and discovery and in the platform ecosystem over the last 3 to 5 years.
I want to talk to you about life at Zomato right now. Right? You've been there for almost a couple of years, and I thought it's been an extraordinary time to be in that organization, especially when it comes to the way Zomato has grown, right? Not just as a great corporate citizen, but also as a powerful force in that industry. Right? How has that journey been for you so far?
Zomato is is a phenomenal organization. I think the space of food is itself, very evocative, right? So it allows you to build product experiences that are very, very close to the user, right? So I think that as the confluence of the vertical in itself and the user experience that you can build, I think, and what they've done over 10, 12 years, right? Where I think it's for me and has always been, right? Probably one of the handful of world-class products that have been built out of India, right? And I think and that culture is a very exacting culture. It's very, the pace of innovation, and I don't use that word lightly, Karthik, because I think when you're looking at, how can I find, not just moonshots, but silver bullets, like how am I going to bring technology and the evolution of this food behavior into solving some very, very big problems. Like I haven't seen innovation at this scale, right? And though, initially it might look chaotic, there is a culture that just works because I think very much from the founder, it's still very much a founder-led organization, right? I think Dipinder is steadfast in his belief and enormous commitment to the user, right? I think for him, the user is just primary here. And I think that really defines the organization, right? So I think, and in that way, it's also sensitive to the user. That user now has, I think over the course of the last 2 years, as it also became this huge delivery company, right? That user also became the delivery partner. It also became the restaurateur in a more real sense because it was all happening real time. Because in the dining out business, you kind of go to the restaurant, like there's still a distance, right, between what is happening in the restaurant and what is happening in Zomato, right? Once you find the restaurant and you go there, you might book your table, but then you're kind of done, right? Then you leave a rating or a review. But in the delivery piece, right, because it is really you're ordering, someone's picking it up, bringing it to you, like the whole process is very, very involved, right? And that has fundamentally changed the culture of the company, right? So I think the company is very invested in every part of the marketplace. And what's been interesting from that piece, I think, is this, so it's become a more human company. And because it's become a more human company, I think technology has also played a very, very positive force in changing human behavior and making us aware of a lot of small things, right? Like I'll give you some examples, right? Like real-time tipping, when we introduce the LGBTI, like the tag for that community, when we have a used cooking oil, a complete business, right, which is towards taking off used cooking oil from the market for health reasons. And now we have contactless dining, which began as a feature, which is now a complete business unit. So I think the company has really the art of pivoting, not for the sake of pivoting, but pivoting in small and large ways continuously is this phenomenal culture, which I've had a front row seat to. So I think it's like going back to, the best business school in the world and kind of getting paid to be in it, which is fun. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned the speed aspect of it, right? And
yeah.
I come from a large agency space, and we are known for many wonderful things, but speed is not necessarily speed of running a company. We're very fast in the way we work with clients, but speed with which you can move an entire organization, cut through bureaucracy, etc. What does it take, to be that way?
I think one is, definitely mission. I think in a startup, I think when you're chasing profitability, and you also have an eye on runway, right? Because, you've raised this much money and you have that much runway, you have to very actively keep your eye on both those levers, right? And that makes you want to and have to problem solve at a very, very fast pace, Karthik, right? So that's one reality that is there as a backdrop, right? And then in it, I think you're also seeing very real, and the other bit is in the commerce space, right? I think it's unusually active because you're seeing, when you see transactions happen and you're able to see it in the form of an equation, I think your ability to pull and push those levers are just, again, so exponentially higher than in an advertising industry, right? So I think the transaction space in itself allows for a lot more action and innovation, right? You're not waiting around here. You can run a bunch of experiments to validate your thoughts. You don't have to get a lot of people on board, right? So today, if I think of a feature, I can experiment with 5% of our users, right? Or I can experiment in Auckland, which is like a small geography, like in New Zealand. And then I'm like, okay, does this work, right? What do we fix pure play in that product? And then you start rolling it out by markets and look at nuances for each market, right? So oftentimes, I think Zomato will experiment in a small market and then they'll scale it out for a big market, or they'll experiment with a small percentage of its users and scale it up to the larger percentage, right? So I think it gives you a lot of control, right? And third, I'll say is when you make technology front and center of your organization, again, the power to design, build, and deploy is very, very, very fast, Karthik, because you have the audience, right? You've done a lot of hard work over a decade to get the audience into your platform. And now that gives you the enormous theater to say, okay, what can I do with these audience, right? Like from doing what we are supposed to do, which is to deliver food and help users discover places to go and eat, I can also broaden my capability. Then I can see what is the greatest value that the capability brings and then focus on that value, right? So I think it allows you to do all three at phenomenal space.
If I have to break down the aspects of Zomato, which is quite stunning from the outside, right? I think one definitely is the growth in the international markets part of it and how quickly that has happened. And then, of course, is the entire Zomato Gold success. Right? I think it's been a success not just for Zomato but for the entire digital ecosystem. Right? And then, of course, the way you used content on the platform as one of the ways, to increase the engagement with your audience, and also content that is extremely contextual to your core business. Right? Can you talk to us about all of the three? Maybe we can start with international growth as a piece, and how that experience has been, right? How the different environments in these countries have sort of worked out or not worked out for you.
Yeah, no. So I think the international exposure for me has been tremendous. So for me to actually look at Australia, to look at New Zealand, to look at Indonesia and Philippines, and to be able to look at the Middle East, as well as smaller European countries like Portugal and Turkey, like it's been fascinating. And I think all of them fall within this spectrum of offer-based as well as value-based, right? So if you, and in different areas, right? So if you look at our India market, I think value is a very, very big parameter, right? And value builds loyalty, right? In the Australian market, for instance, brand is a huge part, right? You have to have restaurants take a lot of effort to build details. They have very loyal clientele. People are willing to pay a premium for a premium experience, right? A little bit of that is evident in Dubai as well, right? Small audience, but very, very well-heeled audience. So in a sense, they are again very susceptible to offers. But having said that, they are willing to spend more consistently on different experiences, right? So I think while you have, and Indonesia is a mix of both, right? Where you do have your classic chains that will always be offer-based, But the independent restaurant scene is also very, very vibrant and alive. And any geography that has an independent restaurant scene that's vibrant and alive has the potential to build a more varied experience than just the chains.
Okay.
And reviews are, again, a great parameter for you to see how different each of these markets are, right? Like users in Australia, New Zealand will write very, very long reviews. They'll write to us saying, hey, why was my review taken down? Give us reasons. Or they'll say, I'm not able to link back to the blog. So a lot of the times, even the bugs get identified by users in Australia and New Zealand. Whereas in other markets, like in the India markets, when we introduced the tag-based review system, people actually preferred using tag-based reviews than writing, right? So I think it's sort of everywhere people are passionate about food. But I think that in certain markets, you'll see chains are, like much more popular. I mean, everywhere chains are popular. Yeah, your pizzas and burgers and all those chains, biryani, the chains are very popular. But I think in certain markets, like in our top 3 cities, which is Delhi, Bangalore, and Bombay, as well as in Sydney, Melbourne, perhaps Dubai, Istanbul, Beirut, and so on, you will see that there's a very, very, very vibrant restaurant scene, right? And that becomes in a way, they lead the market, at least from a dining out perspective, because outside India, Zomato is very much a dining out product. It's not a dine-in product. In India, it's very much a dine-in product, right?
Okay.
So in those markets, like I'll give you an example, right? So for instance, now in the international markets, tags like Wi-Fi enabled, kinds of coffee, like in Indonesia, coffee is very big, right? So you'll start seeing certain features come up in the restaurant industry that then becomes tags on the Zomato platform. And you'll see some cities very clearly leading that in the market. And then you'll have the second tier of city and the third tier of city in dining out, right? So it's been an enormously interesting education for me, both in terms of understanding how to structure these kinds of establishments, as well as to build user relationships with both Zomato as well as the establishments, and then get the users to start. So in your classic pyramid, right, which is acknowledgement, interest, and conversion, top of the funnel, you're really working with search and you're working with social to say, hey, these are all the things Zomato is doing. This is what Zomato means. These are the kinds of different things we are doing with restaurants, offers, games, etc. Right? And then once you get the user to download the app, you have a whole engagement layer within Zomato, which is really about spending a lot of time finding restaurants, spending time looking at content. If you're in a delivery market, delivering. And then on top of it, you have the gold subscription conversion, right? Where you're saying, hey, after the 5th or 7th visit, can you start thinking about gold, right? And gold is a very, very clearly a value-based subscription, right? So if you look at the subscription space, typically there's value and there's loyalty, right? So Starbucks is your classic loyalty-based subscription. And value-based would be something like gold, right? Where we are saying literally in 2 or 3, transactions, you're going to get your value back, right? So it should be a no-brainer, right? And I think it's interesting because with a value-based subscription, you can use it even as a launch vehicle, right? In a new market where you can say, hey, you might not have heard of Zomato, but guess what? You can get to know us because we have these amazing offers.
And, you mentioned the establishment, you mentioned the ecosystem. And at the end of the day, this is also different cultures and, different people who run these organizations, right? Are there any interesting lessons in terms of culturally dealing with this ecosystem in different countries?
Yes and no, right? I think that, in Indonesia, for instance, we had these coffee awards, right? Because coffee is very, very big in Indonesia. And there I was like really stunned at the nuance within that one vector of the industry, right? So I think there you have so industries, I think geographies where you have some very, very deep and sharp sort of, I think, very, very passionate owners who are, in a sense, they are businessmen and there are chains as well. But you see that whole vertical within the food space in a very, very sort of, it's very rich, right? So in India, you can never have like a coffee awards, right? So we had the best new restaurant awards, which we had done with Condé Nast. But even there, like there'll be about 100 or 120 restaurateurs who come up, right? And I think there's where, COVID might be this interesting sort of reboot, right? Where you start seeing a whole new breed and kind of restaurateur also emerging post-COVID. And it'll be interesting to see what kind this restaurateur is, right? Because everybody's business model, unfortunately, has gotten tremendously hit, right? And the company constantly works with different kinds of restaurateurs. And across the board, people have been hit, unless you're like a large pizza chain or something like that, right? But on the whole, you're going to see this complete reboot, right? So I don't even know if the lessons that I've learned in the past, or if the lessons the companies learned in the past, how relevant they are going to be in the future. Because I think the restaurant landscape is also going to change quite a bit. Yeah, I think the delivery landscape is less hurt than the dine-out landscape, but I think the dine-out landscape is going to change considerably.
Usually in as many places as I can, I say that one of the terms that I hate, I've come to hate in the last 60 days, is the new normal piece, right? Because I for some reason, strangely believe that the world is not going to change as much as we are expecting it to. But your world is likely to probably change the most. Right? How do you see the new normal as?
Yeah, again, I don't think I'm expert enough to speak about that, to be honest, Karthik. But I think everything is going to change. I don't think I'm in your school of thought. I think not just for the restaurant industry, I think consumption is fundamentally changing. And I'm seeing that around me in very different ways. And I also think that the notion of, I think people who, and I'll tell you an interesting, again, example, right? Like when Zomato was declared an essential service, like safety became the only thing that mattered. Right. So everything that the company communicated, it was about safety. Right. Now that communication and therefore we said contactless pickup, etc. Right. Then it became, okay, that has now translated to the max safety steps, right? 8-step process that restaurants have to follow. And then you're also looking at a completely contactless dining business, right? As dine out will be. So two things I'm seeing around me, right? That one, people are a lot of the, the consumption where you didn't spend too much time, right? And you didn't think about too much, right? The discretionary and the non-discretionary spending of all of us, I think the structure and the composition of that is going to change completely, right? And I'll give you another example from a media perspective. If yesterday you subscribe to some 20 media offerings, right? You'll go down to now subscribing to 5 or 7, but you'll double down on those 5 or 7, right? You might actually hit 5 subscriptions, but spend more money on those subscriptions, right? So I think what you do, So one, I think people are removing a lot of the fat in their lives, and they are focusing on what they really are interested in and what they really need. But I think they will go deep in those commitments, right? And I think that's going to be an interesting behavior change to watch.
No, that aspect I completely agree with. I think not just in media choices, but I think generally in life, this entire lockdown has given us a perspective on what is important and critical in life and what is not, right? That is also a wonderful place for us to take a very quick break. We'll be right back on the Filter Coffee podcast, and we'll come back. I want to speak to Durga about Juggernaut and Firstpost and all the other amazing things she had created before. Stay with us.
Hey everybody, welcome to another awesome week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you're not following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Paytm Money and Intel. Their support makes this content possible. So, been a really exciting week on the network this week. We've had some really cool stuff. My old friend Vivek Lad was on Storytellers and Storysellers. Definitely do check that out. On Cyrus Said, we had Ashwin Sanghi on Thursday's episode, and Cyrus and myself did a cock and bull, just the two of us. That was fun as well on Monday. Do check that out. Masaba was on Advertising is Dead, which was another really, really strong episode from Varun. And on the sports front, both Edges and Sledges, Football Shitball had some really fun episodes. That's the Football Twaddle. Do check those out as well. And if you haven't been paying attention and you haven't been listening to Smile India in these times, I don't know why you aren't. It's the most uplifting show that you could listen to. It's a short, bite-sized piece of really positive things that happen in India. Do definitely check that out. And with that, let's get you back to your show.
Welcome back to the Filter Coffee podcast. We're speaking to Durga Raghunath about the art of growing disproportionately and scaling. Durga, before we went on a break, we were talking about COVID and how this is disrupting your industry. But that's pretty much been sort of not COVID. The disruption part has pretty much been your theme across the different industries that you've been part of, right? And since the central theme is that, I wanted to talk to you about another industry that I know you are extremely passionate about, which is the print media industry, especially, and its transition into digital, right? I think there's been many successes, correct me if I'm wrong, many successes in India, but somehow it has always remained a work in progress for us, right? What are the some of the things that we're doing right and not so much right?
I think the news business has gone through sort of this fairly slow journey, right? Unfortunately, in India, I think for a few reasons. I think one, like when I compare it to America, right, which is the other geography I track pretty closely, you had the national papers, and then you had local radio stations and papers, and you had local broadcast stations as well, right? I think somehow in India, local is sort of languages. So languages developed very, very, with a very rich history, right? Like as you and I know, like Tamil journalism and Tamil political writing is of a very, very high caliber. So is Marathi political writing and so on, right? And unfortunately, a lot of those developments have been very separate from the English language. So I think one big problem in India has been English language has been separate and vernacular has been separate, right? So though companies have had diversified holdings, seldom have you had those newsrooms learn from one another or evolve together, right? Yeah. Even if we were mixed media or mixed language individuals, right? So I think that has been one problem. Second, I think has been, and you can say this of many industries actually, Karthik, perhaps telecom, perhaps now education, banking, and so on. I think that when print was continuing to make the money that it was making, nobody thought that it was necessary to change business models, right? In America, even in the 50s and 60s, broadcast started taking away phenomenal budgets from print, right? So in a sense, I think, though it was only in the 90s and in the 2000s, I'd say, when the Washington Post first set up its big digital newsroom across the river, it was one of the first digital newsrooms that was set up. And there too, it was slow, right? The 2000 to 2010 was very slow in America. And then 2010 to 20, they galloped through here. I think I saw, especially the last 5 years have been quite phenomenal. But again, all the business models are under siege, right? I think advertising itself is being questioned now.
Right.
I think in India, unfortunately, digital usage has grown, but digital business models have not developed simply because advertisers like yourselves have, in a sense, not done justice to the digital business model, right? And here I have a bone to pick because digital payments from advertising has always been a huge problem for digital media, right? So it's regulated for television and print, but it's not regulated for digital, right? So we are willy-nilly chasing. I remember when I used to manage all those newsrooms, for a year, people wouldn't pay, right? So that's why you rely on programmatic, because at the end of the day, Google pays your bills quickly, right? At the end of the day, you have money in the bank. You're not waiting for 6 months to get paid, right? So running an independent digital P&L is still a huge challenge in India.
And you've been at the forefront of the, when Weberating launched Firstpost, right? What was it, 2011, 12, sometime around that?
Yeah, 2011, May 10th.
Right. So that must have been some experience. And in fact, interesting, since you mentioned this, around that time, I think probably a year later or something like that, I remember having a conversation with someone from Money Control. And You're saying something that we all knew, but no one has till then put it like that. You're saying that, and I probably have 10x the number of people who read Economic Times, right? But my revenues are a fraction of that. Right? I think since then things have changed a bit, but print has had a fairly longish trust among advertisers in India, isn't it?
So I think that, with digital again, and I'm going to go back to the open web a little bit, right? So with browsers, I think we've just not cracked that. We didn't crack the desktop experience in a user-focused way at all, or in an advertiser-focused way, Karthik, right? The kind of movement of print advertising to display banners, I think it was done very suboptimally. It might have been a good start, but we just didn't innovate enough, right? Now with mobile growth becoming the first screen, right? Mobile becoming the first screen, I think there is a lot more innovation that can happen. Okay. So I think that was a bus that was missed. Second, I think none of us spent enough time understanding our users in the open web, right? I think print still guarantees the delivery of a certain product with a certain exposure, right? In a very at one given time at scale, in a much more concerted and trustworthy way than digital is able to, right? And there's where I think apps come into the picture, right? Today, when I'm able to say I have 10 million download or Zomato's user base, right? And that's where I think page views, clicks is less important than your monthly active users. Now, because we moved to monthly active users, I think advertisers are now trusting the app ecosystem as a symbol of loyalty from the user much more than they did the open web, right? Because when you come in through Google and you just spend maybe, 1 minute, you read another and you bounce off, right? Bounce rates of all these sites were very, very high, right? I don't think any of us tried hard enough to say, okay, if Karthik came once, how am I going to make him come again? And again and again, and how can I build a very value-sharing relationship with Karthik such that he thinks it's worthwhile enough to give me his details and perhaps transact on my platform as well, right? And that has happened only in the last 2-3 years. So I think in the next 3 to 5 years, to see subscription come of age, right? Where you're going to start realizing, and here's where I think, again, it's very, very important for media companies to say, hey, I am not going to only try and make up the money that I'm losing in other media, but I'm actually going to try and create a relationship that is very, very worthwhile with the user, right? And I think there's a lot of new and exciting thinking that's possible.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the next few years. If we were to dial in to, say, 5 years, 6 years from now, what are some of the 2-3 big things that you think will change in our ecosystem, right? Like, for example, I've often thought about it, and I have a theory on social media, right? I think the first decade of 2002 to 2010 was one where we were not really married to any one platform much, right? The same time that Yahoo Rooms were extremely active, you had something like Orkut, and then multiple. And then in the US, you had Friendsters and everything else. But I think in the last 10 years or so, we sort of, went into consolidating on one platform like Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp, etc. But what I'm seeing right now is I feel as we move forward, people are now very open to having different communities, again, in different platforms, right? And not necessarily having everyone just on one platform. That's something that I feel will change over the next 5 years. But, as you look at content and commerce and platforms, what are some of the things that you think will change?
Yeah, so I think that, and I believe this from very early on, right? Even when we set up Firstpost, we were very clear that we didn't want to have a house view, right? We wanted to write 12 different views on something, because truly there are 12 different ways of looking at something, even if the facts remain the same. And the numbers are what they are, right? And I think very quickly the community was outwriting us, right? So even in Zomato, the amount the community does on the platform is phenomenal, right? So I'm a big believer, and today as I've tried to wayfind through COVID, right? Sure, I do read The Economist and I do read the Financial Times because, there are some, and there I respect a process more than I necessarily respect any one person, right? But if I look at, okay, where am I seeing the most original thinking? It is from individuals on Medium or it is from individuals on Twitter, right? So I think there is this phenomenal democratization. Okay, so my positive two beliefs, right? I think actually that, when a lot of the social media companies were set up, if you read their initial, why were they set up? A lot of them were set up to make sure that very original, unusual thinking could bubble to the top, right? Even YouTube, though now it's hard to find that. So I think there is going to be a reversal, or rather a progression towards that, right? Where you are going to find, perforce by the reality that we live in, much more original thinking as well as a return to expertise, right? And I believe that that is a good thing to happen. So one, I am seeing a return to expertise and us paying a premium for that, which I think also means, going back to my previous point, saying that what I call premium is not just in terms of how much it costs, Karthik. I think for me, it lies in the details. I think we are going to go back to valuing, where you move. And I think Benedict Evans in his last presentation had this great slide where he was the search for value against the search for quality, right? He had this graph, and I think quality is going to start shining through. And thirdly, in terms of companies, I think we are going to see a new crop of tech companies that are going to lead the way in terms of a couple of things, right? One, purely by saying, listen, we have this very phenomenal engaged user base, and we can use that user base for good things as well, right? We did a lot of micro and macro donations during our Feeding India campaign, and you won't believe the number of people who contributed, right? Second, I think people are going to focus on what is the most important or valuable part of their flywheel, right? And I think you're going to start seeing a lot of, whether it's your delivery partners, whether it is your service people, everybody is going to start valuing service as a huge differentiator, right, in the times to come. And I think there is going to be a certain amount of how can we share to be more equitable also happening with companies and societies, right? So I feel like this has been too sort of fundamental, hard, and deeply personal and professional a lesson to come out of it and be the same, Karthik. At least I like to believe that.
No, you mentioned this, and I was just going to come to that in a bit. You mentioned the kind of stuff that Zomato has done, not just in the COVID time, but I remember during the Chennai floods as well, and then many, many other occasions as well. These are tricky decisions, right? These are decisions that can go either way. There are organizations which have tried to do this, but sort of failed. While your intentions might be right, the PR impact of it could go either way, right? How do you get these decisions right, especially at times of distress?
So I think again, I'll go back to saying that the founder is important, right? The founder is important. And I think that as long as, so everything in Zomato, we have a bunch of groups, right? So groups get formed, things get discussed. And I think the right viewpoint wins, yeah. So it's kind of the strangely very, very democratic and non-top-down pace, And I think when that happens, and when anyone from whatever level you're at, however old you might be in the company, however senior you might be, feels they're empowered enough to speak their mind, I think it's just invariably you end up doing the right thing. So I think oftentimes it has been easier. I think we've just done, and these decisions didn't happen like with a lot of discussion. They just happened. And then we dealt with the fallout or not, right? But then again and again we do it because all our muscles are the same and we never learned, I think, from mistakes, right? And I think that has been, I think for me, at least throughout my career, I think I've just done those things because I do believe that a company is a function, it has a function to play in society. I don't think it can only be about figuring out profit. I think it is about jobs. I think it is about setting an example. I think it is about communication. And more so, right? Like, look at what's happening with Black Lives Matter, right? I mean, consumers care. Like, you're sitting on top of all the brand work that you guys do. You know how deeply now consumers care, yeah? If you don't speak up, it's bad for business, right? And I think that's becoming apparent.
No, I'm amazed at that, right? It's to just not think this, not overthink it and just do it instinctively. That's great, and it's very, very rare among brands, right? I've seen the other extreme of it is where there is infinite amount of discourse, and by the time you end up doing something, it is a fraction of what the original vision was, right? In terms of
also, it's a function of not taking yourself too seriously, and I think that has again been a Zomato characteristics for the last decade. Like, if you look at all our social media, right, it's so clear to see, right, Karthik, that we're constantly like laughing at ourselves.
Yeah. And that has really worked out for you. I teach at MICA, now it's been 6 years. And every time I ask the question as to which brand do you think has a lot of character on social media? Irrespective, the first answer that comes out of everybody's mind is Zomato, right?
Yeah.
I think that sort of character, very few brands have.
And it's people, there are 4-5 amazing, and I'll say this even at Firstpost, right? I had this 3-member team, Aisha Pereira, who was with me. She's Sri Lankan, now works with the BBC. There was Adrija Bose. There were 3-4 people who just humanized the whole thing, yeah. They apologized when they had to. They cobbled people up when they had to. They set up Google Sheets to help people. Like, if you're really social on social media and you actually think about what social means rather than nonsense, I mean, Firstpost was huge, right? I mean, I think literally, we were like the most shared brand in literally 4 months. It was just ridiculous. And that was not very thought through. It was just something that we did because we said, listen, we have the opportunity not to have so many filters. And as long as we are truthful and we are honest and we are not trying to be divisive, we will be ourselves, right? And there I give Raghav and Harish and Sai, a lot of these guys, full credit on. They really backed us to the hilt. It was amazing.
Yeah. Talking of amazing things, I think there's one part of your journey that we haven't really touched much, which is the entire story of Juggernaut. Right? I'm amazed at the conception of that idea and how that came about, and how audacious it was. It goes again, to the larger theme that we're talking about, which is just disrupting and growing and scaling, etc. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that came about? How did it begin?
So I had at that point heard that Chiki had left Penguin. She had walked out with 3-4 of her editors, and I had heard she wanted to set up some digital thing, right? So when and I have been wanting to ask these 4 questions, and it has always puzzled me about readership in India, right? Where the number of readers per book is terribly low, the price points are very high, and the number of genres are very, very low, right? And I was trying to, so if you take the entire English market in India, it's smaller than just the New York market, right? It's very, very, very small for a lot, because I come from the English news business, right? Where there are more than 120 million unduplicated users, right? And I am just stunned that book publishing is so small, right? And I'm taking out education. I'm talking about fiction, non-fiction, right? And I just felt that there was just too much to do. So when we started talking about it, I think I was very clear that there were a couple of things. One, we knew we needed to have a catalog. We knew that catalog had to have genres. But we also knew we needed to have a reading and writing platform because we needed to unearth a bunch of new genres, right? Because interestingly, like even if you just take war writing in America, there'll be like 20 different genres, yeah. Here there'll be one, right? So just genre development is very low in India. Second was, I wanted to make payments very friction free, right? Where for $10, I was like, can I get someone to read, right? And which is where I think Vijay Shekhar was amazing, where at that point he had only given Uber the deep integration, right, into the Paytm wallet. And we were the second startup to get it, right? And I still have no idea why Vijay did it. I went, met him, 2-3 hours, we chatted. He pushed me and pushed me and pushed me. And he said, fine, Durga, you should do it, right? And he just let us integrate that Paytm wallet, right? Which, boom, helped us solve for payments. And I think the third thing was, again, that we knew that this app has to be delightful, right, for the user who comes in to begin their reading journey, right? We knew we had to pick narratives that was scrollable, right? Because in physical books, like today, can you read, like, I don't know, like pick a large family saga, like Suitable Boy on the mobile? It's hard because there are very many tangents, so it's hard, right? You need linear storytelling because you need to, you're scrolling through or you're reading very fast, right? So we knew we had to pick short, so we were going with crime. So it's very, very interesting here. So we were matching genre to structure. Then we were looking at chapterization and, Juhi Chitravanshi, who used to work with Zomato, I brought in, who helped me design this whole app, right, which was outstanding, that whole experience. I remember, so I had this vision, we talked about it a lot, and then she just took it to another level, right? So I think for me, it was a lot of excellent people coming together, and then we worked a lot on the back end too. Like it was about 35 people. It was amazing. And for the first time, we gave authors statistics, right, about their readership. Like it was mind-blowing. It was great. And it's still going strong, right? I mean, we tied up with Airtel to say, okay, their postpaid users, can we give them 3 reads for free? And then Airtel invested in the company, right? So I think it's and now with COVID, there's a huge second wind that the product is getting, right? It's constantly on the top downloaded apps in the app store and doing really well. So yeah, I think you're going to start to see a lot of, again, diversification within publishing as well, right? The other big problem to solve, or rather, I think I would love to work on, is academic publishing, right? I think it's amazing. Like if you just look at the lists out there, if I could really work on the archives of newspaper and I could work on academic publishing again, I think there's so much you can do, right? To just make it sexy and user-friendly.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Are you a big fan of audiobooks?
Yes, I am. I am. So I do listen. I'm again very, very long on audio. I think it's this amazing medium. So one of the things I did in Indian Express was to start like 8-9 shows. 3 Things, which was our news show, has now about 1 million listeners. So yeah, I am very, very big on audio. Yeah, I think it's again more a subscription product than an advertising product. But I think it's a great medium. I constantly listen to books. I think the last thing I listened to was probably, I think it was it wasn't fiction. I think it was non-fiction, but it was about 2 weeks ago, Turning the Flywheel. So this was basically a kind of what do you call, a small addition that to Good to Great, right? Very, very, very amazing. So I listened to it in about 2.5 hours, which was great.
Nice. I'm told Bob Iger's audiobook is great.
Yes. Yeah, I haven't listened to it yet.
Hey, we sort of segued into it a little early, but we usually end the episode by asking the guest what you're watching, reading, and listening. Now that we know what you're listening to, what are you watching these days?
What am I watching? I'm watching a bunch of things. So I'm watching something called The Trial on Netflix, which is pretty cool, which is foreign language, but crime. I love crime. I read and I watch a lot of crime, like from the Ed McBain days, right? I love Westerns like Louis L'Amour, that whole piece, as well as the Ed McBain series. So I watch a lot of crime and I read a lot of crime. I have been rereading this book called Thinking in Bets, which is amazing, that everybody should read. And so that's my reading.
What's it about?
And it's kind of... It starts off with poker. You should read it. It's great.
I love it.
I mean, you should read it. And you interviewed someone, right? A female poker player. It's great.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, So a couple of books, right? So one that I really love is Thinking in Bets. The other is, which Dippy actually gave me, was Thinking Backwards, which is an amazing book too. There's another one which I recommend highly called Drive, which is excellent. I mean, I kind of try and read a lot of. I would. It's not a management genre as much as this. Again, I go back to the point of expertise. It's an important one, I think, and I'm kind of seeking this out a lot more now. And I'm again right. I think the two publications that have again stood out for me is the Financial Times and The Economist, right? Again, I've every day and every week I have read these two publications pretty thoroughly, right? And it's thoroughly impressed me how both have helped me navigate my understanding of the world. And it's all these times also make you, as it has turned the economy inside, I hope it has turned users to be more interested in the world, right? Because one of the big tragedies of news is people have become less interested in world news. And I hope that comes back post-COVID.
I think we've become less interested in news overall.
COVID news has seen like a 25% jump, right? Because now it's all one beat. Everything is flattened. It's one beat, which is called COVID. So everybody's reading and writing about COVID.
Excellent. Hey, thank you so much. It was fabulous to have you on the show. Thanks for your time, and hope you stay safe and well.
Thanks, Karthik. Complete pleasure. And I hope this was not too much of a drag and boring to listen to for users. So please send me any feedback that you can. Awesome. Bye.
Absolutely. Cheers.
So that was our show. If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcasts.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I am _Karthik. That's Karthik with an H on Twitter. And filter_coffee. That's coffee with a K on Instagram.
Hi, my name is Anupam Gupta. I'm B50 on Twitter. I am the host of Paisa Paisa, the show that talks money. On my show, I speak to experts from every field of money and finance, from stock markets, equities, debt funds, credit cards, life insurance, every possible area of money and finance that you can think of. We even did an episode on cryptocurrency. I've got fantastic guests from mutual funds to personal finance experts everywhere. Robo-advisory, startups, just name it, we've got it. At Paisa Paisa, we help you make smart decisions about money. You work hard for money. Now make your money work hard for you. New episodes out every Monday, and you can listen to my show on the IVM Podcast app or any other podcasting app that you have.
Entertainment is like food for the brain. It's a window to culture and a great way to understand the world around us. The internet has changed what it means to be an entertainer, creating new storytellers with millions of fans. It has spawned a new breed, the story sellers, those behind the scenes creating the business for this ecosystem. They work with brands, platforms and channels who are keen to capitalize on an audience hungrier than ever for more stories. I'm Vineet Kanabar, and I have a ringside view to how stories are told and sold. On my show, I bring you creators, artists, executives and marketers for a freewheeling conversation around the business of entertainment. Tune in to Storytellers and Story Sellers for personal stories, analysis and criticism every Thursdays as I talk to the brightest minds telling or selling great stories today.